It's a hot one today. It's almost 7 o'clock at night and it's still 88 degrees out. I apologize for the noisy air conditioner that's going to be running, but my car would be an absolute oven if it wasn't, even with those back windows open. But we're not here to talk about the weather today. We're here to talk about a much more exciting thing, debt. And more specifically, what I'm planning on doing to repay that debt and what that process is going to look like. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what I've done so far to repay debt and kind of how I've gotten here. I didn't have any debt whatsoever until I was, I believe, 26 or so. So I feel like I did pretty well. I decided to go back to school when I was 26 and finished up my piano performance degree. I worked for several years as a mechanical engineer and I never got anywhere with that. I kept getting laid off. I ended up with a job that I stayed at for a couple of years, but they were paying me next to nothing. I think I ended up making like $24,000 a year or something like that. And it was really bad, but it was the job I could get, and it was actually a decent job aside from the pay. And I kept reapplying for other different engineering jobs, and I didn't like the work I was doing or the projects I was working on. So I ended up performing a lot on the piano, and one of the groups I used to perform with all the time had some piano teachers in it, and I had talked to them about teaching piano. They knew I played pretty decently. At one point or another, I'd talked to them about, what the market was like for piano teachers, and there's a really high demand for piano teachers. There still is really high demand for piano teachers out there. There's a lot of piano teachers that make, like 6 figures, because actually most piano teachers out there don't have the skills to teach at a high level. So if you do have the skills, you can actually make a really, really good amount of money. So that's what I ended up doing. I decided to go back to school, finish getting my piano performance degree, which I had most of the piano performance degree anyways, and I did have to take on a little bit of student loans. I was there mostly on scholarship, but a little bit of student loans to get me through and get my piano studio running while I was still in school. But that wasn't where most of my debt came from. At the end of that, my car died and I ended up with a car loan because I didn't have a lot of money because I was still in school and I couldn't work full time. And I needed a new car, so I got something that was reasonably priced. It was actually really inexpensive. It was a little Chevy Spark, which is actually one of the best cars I've ever owned. This car might be a little bit better, but it was a fantastic little car. And I owned that until it got totaled, but I did have to take out a little bit of debt on that as well. The real debt that I got into didn't start until about 3 years ago when everything started going bad in my life. And I'm not going to really talk about exactly what happened there again, but those student loans and that car loan, I've been paying off those as aggressively as I could. Most of my focus was on reinvesting into my business though, and expanding and improving my teaching so I could teach better students. I can get higher wages teaching students that are at more advanced levels, and also for a while there I needed a studio space, so I invested in a studio space until they priced me out of the market basically on that. So I wasn't really paying off debt at a huge clip, but the focus was kind of a balance between, repaying debt and keeping my business running and expanding it and making more money so I could repay the debt faster. And that's kind of the situation I was in. My expenses were, in general, really low. I wasn't having to make huge payments on any of it. I wanted it gone, but I also needed a higher income. So I kind of had to balance that. And I think it's something that a lot of entrepreneurs end up having to do. Sometimes it does make sense to actually, hold off paying off debt if it's not super high interest or anything, to expand your business so you can make more money. And that's kind of the situation that I was in. But fast forward several years and my piano studio is now shut down, and I now have an enormous amount of debt. Basically went from just having those small student loans and car loan and everything, basically having 6 figures in what are basically personal loans. So that really wasn't good. So once I got all this debt, I had paid attention a lot to personal finance in the past, but not really the debt repayment stuff, because I was always thinking, I don't like debt. I'll never go into any serious debt. It's just something I want to stay away from, so I'm just never going to take on any debt. Obviously, that didn't happen. I was forced into this situation where I had to take on just huge amounts of debt, and I had to do lots of studying to learn how to deal with that. So I ended up studying a lot of personal finance. I watched lots of personal finance YouTube channels, read lots of books. At the same time, I also read lots of books on entrepreneurship and stuff like that. Watched a lot of similar channels on that as well, because I was still trying to rescue my piano studio for a long time there. And of course, math has always been a really strong subject for me. So I think I have a pretty good understanding nowadays of how I'm going to go about repaying this debt. So the biggest thing that a lot of personal finance channels talk about is the 2 main ways of repaying debt. So the first way is called the debt snowball, which I believe that's Dave Ramsey's thing. I'm sure he didn't invent it, but he's the one who's definitely popularized it lately. And that's where you pay off your smallest loan first, and then you roll that payment into your next largest loan, and you keep going until you have all your debt repaid off. And there's advantages to that and disadvantages, and I'll go into that in a second. Another way is the debt avalanche method, where you just pay off the highest interest loan first until you just repay all your debt. So there's pros and cons to each one. So the common pros that you hear about with the debt snowball method is that it gives a good psychological benefit and keeps you on track because you're repaying off lots of debt, especially at the beginning, very quickly. And each time you repay that loan and roll it into the next one, it feels really great. So there's actually a couple of other advantages to the debt snowball method, which I don't think get enough attention. The first thing is that it actually is less risky because it improves your cash flow. And if you have more cash flow, you're at less risk of going bankrupt if something bad happens in your life while you're repaying off all this debt. So that is something to consider. And especially if you're in a situation like I was, where all your money is accounted for and it's all just going to debt, and you're really seriously considering, declaring bankruptcy, I think starting off with the debt snowball actually makes a lot of sense because you really need to get some amount of cash flow going. And if you have already maxed out what you can do for work, you really need to get that cash flow going. And so repaying whatever small loans you can get your hands on just to improve your cash flow, I think is really beneficial. The biggest advantage with the debt avalanche is that you'll get rid of your loans the fastest that way, because that is mathematically the best way to repay your debt and just knock it out as quickly as possible. And it'll save you a lot of money in the long run over the debt snowball method. So for me, if you're wondering which way I chose, it doesn't really matter because they were the same thing for me. And I think that's actually true for a lot of people. My smallest loan had the highest interest rate and my largest loan had the lowest, so it doesn't really matter. So I did have one exception. I had a 0% interest loan on my cell phone, and because I was spending all my money on reinvesting it back into my business, it didn't make a lot of sense for me to repay that off quickly because I could spend it on my business to make my money that way, when I ended up having to go out and just get a regular W-2 job anyways. So it did end up making sense for me to pay it off, and I ended up saving, I think, $50 a month, something like that. It wasn't a huge amount, but it actually was really important at the time for me to get that cash flow so I could put it towards something else, most notably my emergency fund, which I had unfortunately had to blow through. So yeah, so basically what I had done so far is save up that emergency fund. I know there's lots of different opinions on exactly how much you need for an emergency fund, so I don't think it really matters that much. There's actually pros and cons, no matter how you look at it, exactly what you're using for your emergency fund. I think the biggest thing is that you have a plan of what you're going to do if you have another financial emergency. And so that's what I did. I put together a plan. I knew the potential problems that I could have, and I had enough savings that I could get myself by for a significant amount of time if I had to deal with any problems. And so that's what I saved up for first after I got rid of all the small loans. And since I saved up that emergency fund, I've just been focused on repaying just the highest interest debt, which of course is just my next smallest loan, repaying that as quickly as possible and focus on that. And I've had a lot of setbacks, of course, with breakdowns of cars and especially of that bus. So what happened earlier this year is my bus did break down, and that left me with credit card debt again. And I've actually already almost repaid it. I make a lot more money now than I did a couple of years ago, so it was really easy for me to repay most of it. And it's almost repaid now. And I sold the bus a couple of days ago. They needed to come back to actually pick it up and sort out the logistics for that. But the bus is already sold. I don't have all the money in my bank account yet, but it's all around. It's basically what we came up with for an escrow, and we put together a contract and we have each other's contact information, so I can sue him if he doesn't follow through. But that shouldn't be a problem. It seems like a genuine person, and I'll have all that money in my account in about 2 days when he comes to pick up the bus. So that's really exciting. So what am I going to do with the proceeds from the bus? The bus is obviously going to pay for its own repairs and get that credit card out of the way again. I hate having that debt hanging around. And then, of course, I'm going to have my emergency fund. And after that, I have a couple of other things that I need to spend money on. I haven't seen my mother in something like 3 or 4 years now, and I should probably go see her. I haven't really had an opportunity to, and I was too broke to until relatively recently. So it would be a really good idea to go out and maintain social connections. I know a lot of people think that just focusing on repaying debt is the most important thing ever, but maintaining social connections is really important, and it can help you get out of a lot of future emergencies, as well as obviously you should probably spend time with people you care about. And especially since I have such a long timeline for repaying the rest of this debt, I still need to maintain those connections with my family. So that's something that I'm going to do at the end of this month and beginning of September is I'm going to go out to the East Coast and go visit my family. I think I'm going to drive out there because it's actually a little bit less expensive for me to do that, but we'll see. Let you know probably next video exactly what I'm going to do. I'd love to drive out there and I can make videos along the way. By the way, be sure to subscribe if you want to see what happens with that. The other thing that I really need to spend money on is I need to get a hitch receiver for this car. I may be buying a trailer at some point, and I also need to make sure that I can move the sailboat if I need to. Obviously I could rent a truck, but that gets really, really expensive fast. But if I need to relocate for some reason, I just need to have a hitch receiver on this car. So that's the way things are going forward. I'm going to spend money on anything that will make me more money, whether it's a business or a certification for a new job that will make me more money. I'm more than happy to do that because that will speed up my debt repayment and that will get me closer to where I want to go. I will spend a certain amount of money visiting family because I think that is important. Friends and family are important to me, even if I don't see them very often. But it's really important to maintain social connections no matter what you're doing. And the last thing I'll spend significant amounts of money on are things that will improve my lifestyle. So anything that will do something like free up time, will put me in a location that has more opportunities, things like that. I'm more than happy to spend money on that as long as it's reasonable, of course. Because ultimately that's the point of what I'm doing, and I have a very long timeline here to repay all of this debt. Otherwise, I'll keep doing what I'm doing. Doesn't mean I can't go on adventures. I'll just keep my travels local, but I should have access to my kayak here as soon as the bus is out of the storage unit. So definitely I'll be kayaking again here very soon, and potentially sailing again. So those are all things I can do without spending much of any money at all. I hope that I can improve the timeline for repaying this all, but I don't know that I can, and it's important for me to, continue actually living. Because currently I'll be almost 40 by the time this debt's repaid, and I don't want to lose my 30s kind of like I did a lot of my 20s. I'll keep living, just doing things that are inexpensive, that's all. And of course, if this channel actually grows and becomes monetized, that does open up a lot more possibilities because I have to film videos of something. And there's nothing saying that I can't enjoy my work, right?